All right, Doug, been a while since we chatted, so there's a lot to talk about today. Do you want to start with finance, the economy, or do you want to start with war?
Well, here we are on a Sunday afternoon, and almost anything could happen when the markets open and the world revs up again tomorrow, Monday morning. So by the time you post our chat today, we could look like heroes or look like idiots based upon what we think is going to happen.
I'll try and get it up as soon as possible, so give us a better chance.
And I'll try not to look like an idiot. So that's a good plan.
So the biggest thing is that let's start with some of the activity that's happening with in finance, and that specifically on the sovereign level. We see major central banks across the world actually actively intervening in their currency to try and give it some stability. Obviously, the Bank of England in their emergency Draghi moment last week, where they're like, whatever it takes, we'll buy the bonds ourselves or the gilts. And then we know that Japan's been doing it for a long time. They continue to do it. Seems like it got a lot more tenuous for them in the last week. Korea is doing it as well. This is the Bank of China is announcing plans to dump the dollar or to at least support the yuan. What does all this mean? It seems insane, the amount of news that's coming out about this, but what does it mean?
Yeah, it actually is insane. And these people are desperate because I really think that we've reached the end game. I felt like these people that have the nuclear countdown clock, the Union of Concerned Scientists, where they're
the doomsday clock.
11:55 at night, and then they move up to 11:56. And I felt like that for a long time with the financial system. But I actually do think that's about 11:57 or 11:58 on the World Economic Countdown clock. And that all these different countries, some want to devalue their currencies because they think that'll help. They're wrong. Some want stronger currencies, like China wants a stronger currency, because God forbid that Mrs. Wong and Mr. Han go to their bank and either the bank won't give them yuan or the yuan are worthless. I mean, China could have a revolution and Mr. Xi could find himself strung up by his heels. These things can happen. So,
and China historically has always been more worried about internal things anyway, right? China historically is focused on internal matters like that.
Yeah, but the Chinese are going to have a lot of problems. As the world economy slows down, their export-based economy, well, people are not going to feel like buying the stuff that they buy from China. They're going to cut back. And that means that unless lots of companies go bankrupt, they're going to have to lay off lots of workers. And the value of the stocks where lots of Chinese are invested are going to go down. And the bonds that they bought from those companies are going to go down. I don't see any way out of this thing. Simply because in the real world, cause has effect and actions have consequences. And these people have been doing things that they think were really clever, but they were too clever by half. In fact, they were incredibly stupid. And now the chickens, if you wish, are coming home to roost. But they're not going to be just chickens. They're going to be the size of predatory pteranodons coming home to roost. Yes, dragons, exactly. So this is actually going to get started. We're moving into the scary stage now from every angle possible that I can see. Every angle possible.
One of the things that we talked about before the call started was we haven't really seen this kind of great volatility yet in the stock market at all, and even really the bond market, frankly, except for in England this last week, where it got really crazy when they decided to intervene. And that was still on a sovereign basis. But we haven't really seen like the private side, the corporate side of thing really tank yet, and that's been kind of surprising given the state of the world now. Well, what we talked about was that in 2008, that crisis was basically at the corporate level, at the bank level, right? Then it almost sunk the global economy because of problems with their balance sheets. And now, well, one of the things to get past that is the Fed and central banks around the world basically took a lot of those problems and put them on their own balance sheet. And is what we're seeing now, I guess, is this the end result of that, of taking on all of those problems, and now it's on the sovereign balance sheet of almost every country on earth?
Yeah, like recently, I think so, actually, because quite recently, that woman who's been placed in charge of England, the prime minister, what's her name?
Ursula von der Leyen.
No, she's in Brussels.
Oh no, Tess.
Yes,
Yes.
or whatever. I mean, she'll be gone before you know it, I think.
Trust.
But it was interesting that they announced that she and their Chancellor of the Exchequer, he's a Kenyan, I think. I'd never heard of him before, but now he's their new Secretary of Treasury. They've reduced taxes. Well, bravo, that's wonderful, step in the right direction, except there's no word of their cutting spending. So that means they're going to be running even bigger deficits, A, and B, she's come out and said that fear not, fellow residents of Blighty, your heating, your fuel bills have quadrupled, but we'll subsidize it. And we'll put a cap on, we'll price control it. Oh, that's a great idea. You can have all you want at $1 a gallon, except you can't, there's not available at $1 a gallon. And we'll subsidize the difference. So, which means they're going to print up lots more money. So at this point, I got to say that the pound is again a good short. And I'm sure George Soros is eyes wide open to that, because he may be evil, but he's not stupid. So that's got to get where all these currencies are turning into toilet paper almost as we speak. And the interesting thing is that there's a flight to quality for currencies. So the dollar keeps going up, and the dollar is a great place to be. Yeah, I guess it is relative to the euro or the yen or the pound, except the dollar is losing value against everything else at 15% or more per year. So it's truly just the healthiest horse on the way to the glue factory. This is really serious. It means that there's no place you can hide. Can't hide in treasuries for that reason, because you're getting negative 10% or more interest rates. Hide in the stock market, well, it's equity, but it could drop 50% easily. Bond market, yeah, that's safety. No, it's not, because interest rates are on their way to heading back up to the levels of the early 1980s. The triple threat to capital, interest rates, currency risk, and default risk are all there. Commodities, they've cyclically gone. I'm drawn back to commodities and these commodity stocks. I mean, where else are you going to put your money? And also just gold and silver coins in your own possession, because we're headed for a financial, not to mention an economic, not to mention a social blow up of the century.
What do you think the next leg down will look like? What might we see this week with the markets opening and all this chaos? Especially we heard over the weekend, for instance, rumors, at least that Credit Suisse was having some liquidity issues, and that's a major institution. And the rumors are not good. If something goes wrong with it, it could have consequences for the whole market. So, what do you think we might be seeing this week?
Yeah, that's interesting, because in the old days, there were three major Swiss banks, the big three in Switzerland. Credit Suisse was one of them. Union Bank of Switzerland was another, and the other one was the Swiss Bank Corporation. And idiotically, all of them decided to get out of the bank, or to expand and internationalize and get out of the simple banking business, which has served them well for many, many generations, and get into the rock and roll business and merge with American brokerage firms and buy all kinds of crap and so forth. And it's funny. I gave a speech via Zoom to a group in Germany yesterday, Saturday. And somebody asked, well, what's the worst bank in the world? I don't know if he asked that because maybe he wanted to go short or something. I don't know. And something twigged in my mind. It's that nobody, and correct me if I'm wrong, nobody talks about, or I think is even aware of the fact that once upon a time, there used to be two totally separate and different kinds of bank accounts: demand deposits, better known as checking accounts, and time deposits, better known as savings accounts. And with demand deposits, and they're two separate, totally different businesses. With demand deposits, just to refresh the memory of some people that are too young or have forgotten, with demand deposits, you put your ounce of gold in the bank, and the bank charges you for storing the gold, number one, safely, and number two, giving you the right to write checks against that ounce of gold, which is there. Mm. So it's a fee-based business. And historically, there was never such a thing as free checking or free demand deposits. You paid the bank for that service. The other kind of banking business, totally different, is the time deposit or savings account business, where you give your ounce of gold to the bank for a fixed period of time, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it is. And the bank gives you interest at a fixed rate for that period of time. Now you can't touch it because the bank has to do something with it. And maybe you get 3% for lending your gold for that period of time in your savings account. But the bank is going to relend it for 6% and take the 3% spread to cover its expenses and make a profit. And that's the way it worked. Two totally different things. But then starting in the 70s, they merged. And now there's no difference between at all in the public's mind or in the mind of these idiot central bankers or commercial bankers between time deposits and demand deposits. And if you start lending money willy-nilly, you're absolutely begging for a disaster. But it's worse than that, because all these banks, like, on my place here in the US, I paid cash for it. But I said, wait a minute. I said this 18 months ago, they're giving money away. So I borrowed like $1.5 million from Wells Fargo at 3 1/8% interest for 30 years. So they're not going to get that money back from me ever, frankly. They're going to get my monthly payments. And if they need that money and multiply that times about 1 million other people doing the same thing, they've got a real solvency or certainly liquidity risk. And they shouldn't be doing things like that, not unless they took a deposit that's fixed for 30 years at, 1.5%. So that's crazy. And of course, all these banks are in the investment business besides now too, so that their capital, which is very small relative to the amount of deposits that they're obligated for, they might invest it in some goofy thing with some trader and it goes poof, and then they got to go to the Federal Reserve or some other central bank to bail them out. But it's even worse than that, because we have a fractional reserve system. And the way that works, in case anybody's forgotten, is you put $1 in the bank and the bank can lend that dollar out. Now what happens? Well, whoever they lent it to is going to deposit it either in that bank or some other bank. So it's all spread out, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. And then that dollar is lent back again, comes back to the bank. Well, then they can lend it out again. And this is why banking has been so terribly profitable during good times, because they lent the first dollar out at, let's say, 10%, it comes back, lend it out again at 10%, it comes back. And so you get this immense return on capital, but it's a dream world. And anything goes wrong along the daisy chain, if it breaks, some bank goes bust, it will have to be bailed out, or it's going to bring down all the other banks that are counting on the liabilities that they have with that bank So it's all very interconnected. And I
Right.
think we're at that stage again. And the only thing the central banks can do is print more money so that they can give it to the banks and they can meet their obligations. Maybe kick the can down the road one more time while the currencies lose value at an accelerating rate. This is really serious.
So it seems like we're entering the period where the central banks have no choice but to print to get out of their situation, because they're gonna have to bail out the banks. Then they're like, you'll have more of what happened in England, where there just aren't any buyers for the gilts. There are no buyers, so they have to step in and buy. But the one country that's kind of doing it differently is the US still. Like, how is the US gonna get away with like, how are they still able to raise rates in the face of all this? And also not the quantitative tightening also, they've dumped lots of stuff off their balance sheet.
Yeah, and rates have to go up and will go back up to 15 or 20%. Otherwise, why should anybody save dollars? They've actually painted themselves into a corner. In a way, I wish I was back at the place in Uruguay where I have that wonderful Bedard print of the two ducks that are in the red corner where they painted themselves into. That's exactly where they are at this point. So what's going to happen? Well, what would I do? You say, okay, it's great pointing out all these things that are wrong. Well, I would do Paul Volcker times 10. In other words, you're just going to have to collapse the whole system. And in the process of doing it, you're going to have to abolish central banks, which serve no useful purpose at all. You're going to have to go back to strict separation of demand deposits from savings accounts. Banker doesn't do that, violates the trust. You know, he's going to have to do a nickel or a dime, get rid of fractional reserve. But you can't do that because there are too many people who are relying on the fantasy world situation that we're in today. Hey, it's great living above your means. It really is. I mean, that's what all this debt is about. Borrow $1 million. It's great. Live high off the hog. Except when you got to pay $1 million back with interest. Then it's not so great for either you or the person that lent it to you, because you pissed away the capital. And that's what the world has been doing for quite some time. I see no way around a catastrophe. I hope I'm dead wrong. What am I missing? Would somebody please draw to my attention what I'm missing?
I think the thing that worries me the most about the situation is that if these banks, if they're going to run into much greater difficulty, and unless they're rescued, a lot of them are just going to collapse. And my personal fear is always about bail-ins. You know, since we saw that with Cyprus, that's always scared the shit out of me. So what do you think about that?
I think that you absolutely should not, absolutely not keep more than $250,000 in any one bank account in the US because they have FDIC, which is a sticker principle. It's all bullshit. But still, since FDIC is kind of an obligation, indirect obligation of the US government, they'll make good on that. But if you have more than $250,000 in any account, bye-bye, just like in Cyprus. So don't have one big fat bank account, have lots of small ones of under that. Now, I don't know how many people are troubled by having that much money that they need more than, but a lot of people are, frankly. So that's one thing you should do, and try to use several banks. That's what you should do. But
do you think that's a realistic possibility? I mean, do you think that we're going to see that in this cycle?
It all depends on what the Jacobins in Washington decide to do. Because don't forget, we've got these fools in charge of the US government, regardless of who wins in November. The executive part of the government is still controlled by the Jacobins. The executive part and the gigantic administrative bureaucracy is controlled by these people too. So I don't know what they're going to do. We're dealing with near psychotics. Perhaps they ought to consult that he, she, or it that's the admiral what to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I
But
guess,
these are the kind of people we've got running things. I mean,
Right.
people with serious mental problems are running things today. Not only serious mental problems, but a totally bizarre world view of economics and the way the world works. Yeah, it's like a guaranteed catastrophe. And it's the same in every Western country. The only
Yeah.
sane person out there, and I'm not defending him, is Vladimir Putin, who everybody hates, is the devil incarnate. Good guy? No, you can't be a good guy and run a major country. Forget about that. But, you know, I don't think he's nearly as bad a psychopath as Ursula, whoever in Brussels.
Yeah, no, well, she's crazy, honestly. I think that she's taken on the role of the new queen mother. You know what I mean? Do you know she has 7 kids actually, which is kind of
I didn't know
interesting.
that.
Yeah, that's when I first heard about it, it was the most, because it's so rare, you know, that's really stuck out. And it's created this impression of her in my mind that I've always been trying to reconcile, because I imagine someone who's a mother of 7 children is probably like a good person, and she's not
Well,
that at all.
yeah. Yeah, you'd think so. You'd think they'd have some common sense, if nothing else. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. So yeah, I think she's the new queen mother now that Queen Elizabeth is gone.
You know, I despise royalty in general, and the British royals in particular. They're really degraded beings, quite frankly. But some are worse than others. But it seemed to me like, within the context of being coming from a line of successful criminals living off of all the peasants, within that context, she seemed like a commonsensical and more or less decent person. Now that she's dead, she's been replaced by Charles III, who's an idiot and a psycho. So that's not going to go well. There's nobody, you know, kind of casting but you know, Queen Victoria, much more powerful than the recent Elizabeth, and she couldn't prevent World War I from happening, even though everybody in Germany, and they were all related to each other. And
Right.
even that, but now you've got a buffoon like Charles. It's got to come unglued even faster.
Well, and I mean, he's all on the climate change bandwagon. You know, we got to stop it at all costs. So he's connected with the World Economic Forum, as far as you can tell, and you know, he's got to be pretty happy about things like blowing up pipelines. It really does help reduce the carbon footprint of the German people. So he's got these are good things in a way.
So we were talking briefly about that. So how do you read the pipeline blow up?
I mean, it seems such a self-evident act of sabotage on the part of probably the U.S. Certainly with U.S. You know, they needed. It's actually really hard to blow these things up, Doug. I don't know if you know, but the steel around them is 1.6 inches thick, and then there's another 4 to 6 inches of steel reinforced concrete around that for these pipes. Okay, so it's not easy to blow these things up. Each segment of these weighs 25 tons. I mean, these are serious things. They're designed to be able to withstand unbelievable damage. So it takes serious explosives, well-trained people doing it and to blow it in several different places so that you make sure that it was a failure. And on the first try, it would work. And the US is one of the few countries in the world, militaries in the world, that has a clear track record of blowing up civilian infrastructure. Also, I think that's a part of it. And the other thing is that, let's say if you believe that Putin is a kind of guy who likes blowing up pipelines, he's a madman, he doesn't really care. And so even though he had total control of those pipelines that were blown up, and they were off, so he had control of them, but he wanted to make sure that they would never be turned on or send a message or whatever. Why wouldn't he also blow up the Norway to Polish Baltic pipeline that actually went live the same day that those other 2 were blown up? Like, the Russians and the Poles do not get along. I think the most contentious relationship probably in this whole thing, but well, Ukraine obviously higher, but Poland's a close second to that, and yet they didn't destroy the competition's pipe. They blew 2 of their own. That just seems, I mean, I guess if you assume he's just, he actually is insane, then that's the only explanation.
But he's not. He's the most sane of all these European leaders. which is, I know, the opposite of what most people have been taught to believe. And if he really wanted to turn off the pipeline, he just has to turn off the switch.
And they were
So
off. They're off already.
yeah. So it makes no sense. And as you pointed out, it has to be a competent, well-equipped military operation that would do this using a submarine. And I'm sure the US has got well-trained crews and submarines that know how to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, well,
So
a couple of the explosions were only apparently as shallow as 90 meters and another at 200 meters. So some SEALs could have done that. They could have done it long in advance, had them all set up for when they needed them. And strangely enough, the day also that it blew up, not only did that pipeline to Poland launch, but there was a mass protest in Germany demanding that they open Nord Stream 2, which had been completed, but wasn't allowed to open. So that same day, the civilians were turning against the regime and the Harry-Carry moves that they're doing to sort of gut the German people. And just when that happened, they eliminated their choice to negotiate.
yeah, it's so provocative. It's so provocative. I mean, what is Putin going to do next? Because you just can't provoke somebody and provoke them and provoke them and not expect some type of a response.
Yeah. So what I read is that they said that they're going to have, because of their legal system, that they're trying to show themselves as being very by the book kind of people. That's the way they've tried to handle, from what I understand, this whole thing in Ukraine so far. So they said we need to do an investigation and see what our investigation figures out with it. And then at that point, we'll have to respond to it. But we're going to do an investigation first. And we certainly are not going to rely on the NATO nations investigating themselves. I mean, actually, the main country that's leading that investigation, by the way, is Sweden. Now, Sweden is applying to join NATO. So I don't know if you're applying for a job, Doug, like with the boss there, you're applying for the job, and the boss is asking you for information. Are you going to give him the information he wants, or are you going to give him objective things he definitely doesn't want to hear? It's pretty clear they're going to tell NATO whatever they want to hear.
One thing, it makes sense to me at all. Why would Sweden want to put itself in direct danger by joining NATO? As a neutral country, it's certainly not in Russia's interest to attack Sweden. I mean, that's just, so why is Sweden doing this idiotic thing to start with? I mean, joining NATO, which should have been abolished when the Soviet Empire blew up in 1990.
Yeah.
It served, from that point, no useful purpose. And now it's become, I don't know where this analogy comes from, but NATO's become a self-licking ice cream cone where it almost can't be taken apart and destroyed now.
Yeah, it's too big. Yeah. Well, and one of the things of Sweden is interesting is that they did just they just elected like a right-leaning government, won the most recent elections, but of course it changes nothing. They might have some internal policies that might be different about the way they handle refugees in the past that might come to pass, but in terms of the application for NATO, that's still there. In terms of their view of Ukraine, that's exactly the same. And then this woman who was elected, people were very excited about, and she's a firebrand. I mean, she's very compelling in Italy. They say she's like the new Mussolini in a way. But the day after she comes out, she goes, we stand by Ukraine. It's like, so she's on the same program, and they all are. It doesn't matter who you elect.
No, it really doesn't. And it is interesting that Europe at this stage seems to be run by women in Britain and Italy. And
Finland, the prime minister is there because she got in trouble for partying. So we saw her in the news.
And I don't know who's running Germany, but they've got a number of high up women that are, in fact, I should actually take a look at some chart, but I think Europe is being run by women at this point. High testosterone women, and the men are all pussies.
Yeah, that certainly seems the case. Certainly seems like it. So
it's just insane. Well, tomorrow when the markets open, I'm asking myself what to do. How much of what we're hearing about BlackRock and Credit Suisse and God knows what else is still rumor, or how much of it's actual reality? Because what was it said with BlackRock? They've lost more money. They've lost more money than any entity in history in the last 6 months.
Hmm.
And there seems to be a high correlation between that and there being the in back of all the ESG nonsense. So I'd love to see them punished. But if BlackRock went bankrupt, the question is, well, that's okay. It's just a commercial business and the funds can be managed elsewhere. But question is, how many liabilities does BlackRock, the corporation, have that they're going to default on, and the value of their stock collapses? Is that going to destroy somebody else? There's a lot of unknowns here.
I'm looking up that BlackRock number and I see an article, this is from late July. And it says that clients of the world's largest asset manager lost an unprecedented 1.7 trillion in the first half's market carnage. So that's for the first half of this year. I'm looking for something more recent though. Still a lot.
Maybe hard to get because these outfits often only report quarterly or not semi-annually, and so who knows? But I'm asking myself, what should I do? Should I take more than play money to go short the market? Because if we're looking at a real crash, God forbid I don't profit from it. I just couldn't live with myself. Crash, but it's so dangerous. But the downside risk, the downside is vastly more than the upside risk. So it's a good bet.
And how would you short the market? What's the trade you'd make?
Well, I like to work in the futures market. It's liquid, it's leveraged. I'd probably place a bet in the futures market, or I might find some really crappy US bank and might actually buy a put. I hate to buy options, but at major turning points, yeah, you can get so much leverage by buying the option, even though that tends to be the sucker's bet. But still, I might buy a put option in some especially weak US bank. That might be a good way to play. Futures market, that, or buy a put option. Certainly sell more calls on the NASDAQ, which is what I have been doing. So, but you know, it's like Richard Russell said, and this can't be repeated enough. In a depression, everybody loses. The winner is the person that just leaves. You know, it's like, hey, how do you profit from the collapse of the Roman Empire? Well, you can't. Nobody won. Not even the invading barbarians won. Not really.
So what do you do about some of these speculative positions in in the commodity stocks, gold stocks, uranium stocks, things like that? Because those have been swept up in much of the downdraft of the last 6 months, but not uranium. They had an upswing, obviously. But I mean, you got to imagine if there's a downdraft, a big one, everything gets sucked into that.
Well, I'm not going to sell them now on that. I guess I'm going to have to just ride it out.
Yeah.
But I don't own them on margin. And I'm getting on these typical gold stocks, the big ones, not the little specs, 5%, 6% in dividends. The oil stocks are even better. I mean, last year, Petrobras paid 25% in dividends, and it's currently selling at 3 times earnings. Still selling it around what, 12 or 12 and a half or something like that, 3 times earnings. Yeah, and you know, Lula's going to be elected in Brazil. Not good, but you know, I have to treat it like an Argentine stock where they've had morons running that country for decades, and the stock market still exists and goes up and down. Yeah, I'm just going to have to ride it out and make some bearish plays. It's just going to be so unpleasant and inconvenient.
Yeah, I'd say. One of the things that I wonder about is, what if you have some long-term holdings? Maybe you've owned Google for a while, maybe you've owned some of the FANG stocks or I don't know, the airline stocks, you own any of these things that have done not too bad over whatever period of time, and you're up on them. Is this the kind of time where you take profits in general for in an environment like this, when you have just these long-term holds that have gone way up over the last 5 years?
I think it is, because here's an interesting thought. Unless you see something as being so cheap that you think you're actually at or close to the bottom, sell it. And you know what? Think about it and then see if you want to buy it back. Nope.
Yeah.
Well, you could buy it back. So
Yeah.
make a new choice and wash away, your attachments and fond memories and all this kind of stuff of the stock. Just dump it. Now you got some cash, which is a hot potato itself. And now you got to make a new decision what to do with cash. So answer the question. If anybody asks me, I got Google, I got Amazon, I've got Netflix, I've got all this crap. Yeah, sell it and then think about it anew.
Yeah, makes sense. Especially the stocks you've held for a long time that have done well for you, but have then retreated now, you're well off their highs. You feel like you're waiting for them to come back. Like psychologically, you want to hold on to those expecting a comeback. And that's a huge mistake, isn't it?
Yeah, you can hold on to them long enough that instead of waiting for a comeback, God, I better sell this thing while I got some money left. Then it's a panic sell. And that's when the bottom happens. So we're not there yet. So I'd say now's still a good time to sell.
Okay. Well, good. So besides the market collapse, the other serious threat I think that the world faces right now with this Russia-Ukraine situation, there's been so much talk over the last 10 days about the use of nuclear weapons. Like, I've never heard of it. It's almost as if you're being prepared for it, like it's going to happen, and just to get it in people's heads to expect it. Am I reading wrong?
I'll tell you what I can't believe. Here is a border war type of thing that's been going on for about 1,000 years in that part of the world between two shithole countries. And it should be like a column or two on the 6th page of the paper. I mean, who cares when two crappy countries are having a war with each other? May the best man win. Sorry about it. But they've made this thing into a worldwide, potentially global thermonuclear war type of event. And if we don't get an actual nuclear war, well, maybe we'll get a cyber war, which could be just as bad because the whole world runs on computers, financial world, medical world, utilities, you name it, airlines, transportation, everything runs on. So a serious cyber war would set the world back many decades, or a biological war. I'm sure these idiots are thinking about that too. I mean, maybe COVID was just kind of like an early overture to see what would happen if. And
it does feel right now like we're stumbling in, like what my understanding, what I read about in advance of World War I. It's just like everyone is just stumbling into this nightmare, and like without any realization of how dangerous it's getting by the day.
Yeah. Like Barbara Tuchman called it. She said, sleepwalking towards the Great War. Yeah, they're not thinking about it. And these are the people in charge are much more psychopaths than they ever were back then, because they had much more power than they had before World War I. These governments today, and they're much more desperate than they were back then. Yeah, how are they going to defuse this thing? Well, if I was the president of the US, I would call a private meeting with Putin and say, look, sorry, the previous administration were fools and idiots, and it's up to you and the Ukraine. Bye. And I'd like to have a good relationship with you, okay? Let's let bygones be gone. That's what I do instead of provoking and for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, and I think it seems, based upon the fact that we're funding the entire Ukraine government at this point, the U.S. Treasury is, or we're printing the money, the Fed is, I guess, for it. Then it seems like Zelensky would do whatever the hell the U.S. president told him he had to do. It would end tomorrow if he would force them to sit down and to negotiate, and it just seems totally unwilling to do that.
It is amazing because Zelensky continues to be painted as almost the second coming of Christ, when in fact he's closed down opposition newspapers and rounded up opposing political people, and in addition to fomenting this war and conducting an active war against the Russian part of his population, which he was insisting Russian couldn't be speaking. He's an awful guy. I mean, he's a second-rate actor, but somebody's put in that position, and the power has gone to his head. So I hope he winds up in jail, but the $500 million that he's been awarded so far, where did he get that money? Is it true? I don't know. But, maybe that'll keep him out of jail, or maybe not. He's supposed to have a $30 million house in Miami. So when it all falls apart, he can go there and run a talk show or something. I don't know.
Well, okay, one more thing. It seems to be this emerging trend now where because the stress is growing among all of these blocks of nations like the EU, that it seems to start to be fraying in my mind, where you see people like, for instance, Ursula von der Leyen. She said, if Italy voted this woman into office, that they had tools to deal with her, the same sort of tools they were using on Poland and Hungary, for instance. You got to imagine that when because of the natural separation of England and the EU and currencies, that they're also not on the same side, that they rather the pound survive compared to the euro. So I wonder if the whole thing, the allies could completely fray under the stress of the economic collapse that's coming our way, and who knows what direction it could go if that happens.
I wish I could make a bet that Europe is going to break up into lots of smaller countries. I mean, thank God the Soviet Union broke up into 15 different countries. Excellent. Now Russia ought to break up into a score of other countries, because Russia's an empire itself, but that's another question. Glad Yugoslavia successfully broke up into 6 countries. Glad Czechoslovakia broke into 2. But, these are kind of Eastern European places. But I hope Italy breaks up into a couple of dozen different countries. I mean, Venetia tried to split off some time ago. I mean, it only became one country in the 1850s under Garibaldi. Before that, it was a bunch of principalities. And the same with Germany. It only became one country. This was a real pity under Bismarck in 1870 or something like that. Well, Germany ought to break up too. So, and there are parts of France and of course Scotland and Wales from the United Kingdom, and it's parts of Spain like Catalonia. So I think it's going to start coming apart, because the parts of these countries that are paying more in taxes and therefore getting less in benefits are going to say, hey, screw you. I don't want any part of this. And I think that's going to happen.
For years, you've been talking about the idea that these countries are going to break apart, these political unions are going to break apart, and then within countries themselves are breaking apart. And up until I think about 2 weeks ago, I couldn't actually see how that could come to pass, because if anything, it seemed more centralized, harmonized, but you just see cracks forming as people face the idea of people freezing to death over the winter. You just see things breaking apart. And I think you can imagine now it could just fracture into more pieces than we can currently imagine. And that would be great, but awfully chaotic and disastrous on the way there.
Well, and there are going to be additional impulses in that direction, because, there will be mass migration from the Near East and from Africa.
Right. I sent you that video where there's 100,000 of them in a staging area in Africa to go into Europe. I sent you that video, didn't I?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's
the beginning.
Yeah. And of course, local people are going to say, hey, I don't want to put these people up in my house. I don't want to pay for these people. I don't know who they are. I don't even like them. So that's a good reason to break away from the central government, which is inducing that. And few people realize that the last time that I counted, because I looked it up, how many people work for the European Union in Brussels? The number I came up was 50,000 employees, little bed bugs living in Brussels trying to regulate the whole continent. And that doesn't even count the lawyers and the accountants and the hangers on. I mean, this is they'll all have to go home and start,
Doing something productive with their
pushing
lives.
brooms or
Yeah.
something productive, pumping gas. I don't know what they'll do,
Yeah.
but
There won't
not
be any gas to
productive
pump, Doug. You're not gas.
oh, I forgot. That's right. There won't be any electricity for their Teslas either. So they can learn to muck out stables as the horse makes a comeback, perhaps.
Maybe that'll be it. Yeah, it's getting interesting. So
Yeah, it really is. I actually can't wait to get back down to Uruguay at this point.
there's everything is nice and tranquilo here, as you'd expect.
It's kind of the middle of nowhere, but with modern technology. It
Yeah,
has a lot to offer.
it's great.
On this speech that I gave to the Europeans, mostly Germans, yesterday, I said, listen, what you guys ought to do is sell all your bonds and stocks yesterday, and Monday make a reservation to go to South America so you can stop paying German taxes and basically live tax-free and get your money in a country that is not going to actively try to steal it from you. That makes sense. I mean, you guys are living in Germany, not so much in 1933. You're living in Germany in like 1936. So time's getting short.
It's amazing to me that we know so many very smart people that are still there, given everything. I mean, the way they've handled the last 3 years, everything's been going on for the last decade. I know the bowling frog syndrome, it just happens little by little and people don't notice, but man, it's crazy to be there.
I guess it's inertia, all of your old friends are there, your relatives, your family are there. Oh, the kids don't want to get out of school. I've got to pack up my house with a lifetime's worth of possessions. I got to, the inertia making. But we've both done it, and I didn't find it was that traumatic. I mean,
No, well, I think, but we're a little different in that regard. I know it would be really hard for most of the people in my family to do something like that. They would just be, it was just so shocking to them. I mean, it was shocking to them when we moved on to Argentina back in the financial crisis as well. But yeah, I've had a lot of debates with people who say, well, you're hiding, you're running and hiding, in our Telegram. Most of them don't attack me directly for saying that, but some do. And I say, well, I'm not hiding. I'm the only one who's not anonymous here, by the way. And so people know who I am. But also, I'm like, if you're an American and you can look at what's an American tradition, America is populated by people who got the fuck out of the bad place and went to where there was hope and a future. They lived for the future, not for the past. And I think that people say, no, this is my grandpa was born here, I'm going to die here, that kind of thing. That's living for the past. And I get it. But your forefathers had the balls to give it all up and take big risks, go somewhere else and live for the future. And I think that the world needs more of that, frankly.
absolutely do. And, it's actually better than that, because what's the name of the hero in Gone from the Wind? Brett, what's his name? The guy who's the famous actor that played the famous character in the novel.
It's Clark Gable, right?
Clark Gable played, I think his name was
Rhett Butler.
Rhett Butler. Yeah, it was Rhett Butler. Well, he saw what was coming in the North and the South, and he got the hell out. And he became a blockade runner in England and made a fortune, and was helping his countrymen back in South Carolina or wherever he's from. Mm-hmm. So look at it that way. Yeah, he was the only intelligent person in the first part of the movie.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it here, Doug, and then we'll just we'll be back on Wednesday. We'll see how the first few days of the week go, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about by then.
with great fear and trepidation, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens tomorrow. I hope nothing.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I really appreciate the last extra decade we had beyond what I thought we'd have with the financial crisis. And every day we can continue like this is, I'm trying to appreciate it.
Exactly right. It's very funny. But
It really is.
when I say it's very funny, that's what we call gallows humor.
Exactly. Exactly. 100%. All right, Doug, thanks so much. We'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Thanks, Matt.